So hey guys, and welcome to the Ultimate Resource Farming Guide for 2017. In this video, I'm going to show you where you need to go and which missions you need to do to farm all the resources you're ever going to need in Warframe. Now, the original idea here was to have a menu at the start of the video where you would just click on a resource that you want to farm, and an annotation would fast forward you to that resource, but since YouTube removed annotations, we will have to do with timestamps in the description. So if you just want to know how to farm one or two resources, just go to the description below this video, find the resource you need, and click on the timestamp next to it. I've also bundled a lot of resources together, so one timestamp may have 2, 3, or even 4 resources next to it, and that's because some missions are just good for farming multiple resources at once. And before we jump into the first mission, I just quickly want to talk about the setup that I'll be using throughout most of this video, which is going to be Necros Prime with Ignis Wraith, Static Core, Atarax, and Carrier Prime. I'm using a Desecrate build on Necros so I get more resources from fallen enemies, and I'm using Vacuum on my Carrier. You can use a Smitakavat if you want to get more rare resources instead of the Carrier or any other Sentinel, but just bear in mind that you will have to run over the resources to pick them up. The reason I'm using Ignis is because it's, in my opinion, the best weapon for farming resources right now, because a lot of the resources that you're gonna get, especially if you're playing solo, are gonna come from broken containers and resource nodes. You will still get some resources from the enemies, especially if you're using Desecrate, but a lot of the resources you're gonna get are gonna come from other sources. This is also why I'm using the Sonic Ore, because it's once again a very solid weapon that does AoE damage, and Atarax is great overall. I'm using a Maiming Strike build, so I can do a lot of damage, and it's awesome for taking down the tougher units, and since I'm also using Primed Reach, I have a lot of range on the slide attack as well. This is by far my favorite farming setup. I've been using it for a couple of months now, and it's really effective at what it does. And before I forget about it, I'm also running a resource booster, so I'll be getting double the amount of resources you would normally get if you're not using one. Also, a lot of the missions that I'll be recommending today are survival missions, and there are 3 main reasons why. Number 1, survival missions are just really good for farming at the moment. Number 2, they scale really well as you add more and more players, because if you have more players in your party, the game will spawn more enemies, which will lead to more resources. And number 3, they give you the option to extract whenever you want. You can either extract early at, let's just say, 5 minutes and just get a couple of resources, or you can stay there for 30 minutes and farm a bunch of stuff. And that's enough blabbering for today. Let's go and farm some stuff. So the first thing I would always recommend you do if you want to farm resources is to go to the star chart and check if there are any endless fissure missions on a planet where you want to farm, because endless fissure missions are by far the best missions for farming resources at the moment. The reason why they are so good is because you get a bonus for each relic that you crack. The first crack relic is going to give you 25% bonus affinity, the second one is going to give you 25% bonus credits, the third one is going to give you 25% bonus resources, the fourth one is going to give you 25% bonus resource drops, and the fifth one is going to give you a refined relic. And the best thing about this is that the bonuses don't just stop at the 5th relic, they keep going on and on and on. So the 6th relic is going to give you 50% extra affinity, 7th relic is going to give you 50% extra credits, and so on and so on and so on. And this is amazing even if you're not running a booster yourself, because you're just gonna get more than in any other mission. But if you add a booster on top of that, or you're running both a resource and a resource drop booster, you are gonna get loads of stuff from these. Now, while these endless fissure missions are definitely the best way of farming resources, they are random, so sometimes you're not gonna get any endless fissure missions, and even if you do, most of the time they're probably not going to show up on a planet where you want to farm resources. And that's why I made this video. So if you want to farm a lot of Ferrite, the best mission by far is Apollodorus on Mercury, which is an infested survival mission. Here you can easily get over 2000 Ferrite every 5 minutes. The enemy level is also very low, so even if you're new to the game and you don't have good gear yet, you should have no issues with them whatsoever. The best way of farming Neurodes is still killing sentients on the moon. I would personally recommend the mission Tycho because you're gonna get a squad of sentients every 5 minutes, but you can do the other ones as well. The only mission that doesn't spawn sentients is Stiflar, which is the defense mission. Now, the reason why these missions are so good for farming Neurodes is because you can get them from either killing enemies, breaking containers, breaking resource nodes, but also by killing the sentients, because they are considered a mini-boss, so they have a very high chance of dropping either a Detonite Ampule, Neurodes, or an Orokin cell. I would also recommend you bring in as many people as possible, because every person in the squad will spawn in 2 sentients, so if you have a full squad you will have 8 of them instead of just 2. And it's also nice to have backup because both the Corpus and the Sentients can do a ton of damage. This is also the only mission that I farm with Excalibur instead of Necros because his Exalted Blade is really effective versus the Sentients. Now it's kind of pointless to tell you how many Neurodes you're gonna get here because it's a rare resource, so RNG plays a big part in here, but it's also heavily dependent on how many people you bring and how long you stay here, of course. But I was getting around 3 Neurodes every 6 minutes. Next up, we have neurosensors, and the best mission that I found right now is Chimeria on Jupiter. It used to be Themisto on Jupiter, and it's not bad. You can still chain run Salad over and over and over again if that's what you want to do. But in the last round of testing, at least for me, Chimeria has been performing far better. Now, this is a Dark Sector infested survival that has a 20% increased resource drop chance. It's using the same Corpus tileset as Themisto, so it has a lot of lockers, containers, and resource nodes, and the enemies are once again fairly low level, so they shouldn't give you too much trouble. And all in all, on my own, I was averaging somewhere between 3 to 4 neurosensors every 6-ish minutes. Moving on to Argon crystals and control modules, which is going to be Annie in the Void. Now, this isn't actually better than the other survival mission in the Void, but it's lower level, so it's easier to farm, and that's the reason why I chose it. Now, even though I would recommend you break as many containers and resource nodes as possible in any of the missions that I'm going to recommend today, it is really important you do it here, especially if you want to get Argon crystals. Because every time I did any amount of testing with Argon crystals, I always got the majority of them from containers, not from enemies. And they're once again a rare resource, so they are pretty damn random. So sometimes you're not gonna get any Argon crystals even after 20 minutes, and sometimes you're gonna get 10 of them in just 5 minutes. But luckily you don't need a lot of them, so just pray to RNGesus and you will eventually get as many as you need. Control modules, on the other hand, are a different story. They are fairly plentiful, and you should be averaging somewhere around 5 to 6 every 5 minutes. Moving on to Gallium, Polymer bundles, and Plastids, and the mission we're gonna do for those is Assur on Uranus. It used to be Ophelia on Uranus, but they've changed the Assur tileset from the underwater tileset to the Grenier Gallium tileset, which is far better for farming. It's a Dark Sector infested survival that has a 25% increased resource drop chance, and you should easily be able to get around 900 Polymer bundles, 400 Plastids, and around 4 Gallium every 5 minutes. Ophelia is still good if you want to farm Tellurium, because it is a submersible mission, so you're gonna get Tellurium as well, but when it comes to Polymer bundles, Plastids, and Gallium, Assur wins. Next up, we have Nano Spores, Mutagen samples, and also Lephantis nav coordinates, so you can do Lephantis and get yourself Necros if you don't have him already. And the mission we're gonna do for those is the Orokin Derelict Survival. Some people like to do Orokin Derelict Defense instead, but I would not recommend it, especially if you don't want to go in with a full squad, because you're just not gonna get as many resources from resource nodes and containers, which is where like half or maybe even 70% of the resources are gonna come from in the first 5-ish minutes for you. And the amount of stuff you're gonna get here is actually pretty ridiculous after the buff, because you're gonna get like 7 or 8,000 Nano Spores, 7-ish Mutagen samples, and 2 to 3 Lephantis nav coordinates every 5 minutes. And please bear in mind that I'm doing all of these tests on my own, so there is at least some kind of consistency between all of the runs. So if you go in with a full party, you're gonna get far more. Moving on to Orokin cells, Detonite ampules, circuits, and alloy plates. Yes, many things at once. And you're gonna get all of these in the mission Gabby on Ceres, which is once again a Dark Sector infested survival. This is pretty much the only mission where I managed to get a decent amount of Orokin cells. It's not reliable still, because Orokin cells right now are probably the rarest resource, so their drop chance is all over the place, and you really have to pray to RNGesus to get them. but out of all the missions that I've tested, this was definitely the best one. It's also one of the missions where running a Smeetokavat instead of a Sentinel would be a good idea, because they can just magically spawn in a couple of Orokin cells for you. But all in all, I was getting around 1000 circuits, 2500 alloy plates, around 10 Detonite Ampules, and 1 to 2 Orokin cells every 5 minutes. But this is the average that I got across multiple runs, so sometimes you're not gonna get any Orokin cells, and sometimes you're gonna get 2, 3, or maybe even 4. Next up, we have Salvage and Morphics, and if you want to farm those, you definitely want to head over to Mars and do the Dark Sector Infested Survival Wahiba. This mission is really easy to do, so even if you're new to the game, you should have no issues with the enemies whatsoever, and it's amazing for farming because you're gonna get like 3,000 or 4,000 Salvage and 4 to 5 Morphics every 5 minutes. Next up, we have Rubedo, Fieldron samples, and Oxium, and we're going to farm all 3 of those in the mission Bal on Europa. And I know it may seem a little bit weird to have so many survival missions and then suddenly out of nowhere, bam, mobile defense, but Bal on Europa has been one of the best farming spots for a very long time now. It has a ton of spawns, so you're going to get loads of resources by just killing enemies, and for whatever reason, it just spawns an insane amount of Oxium Ospreys. And the best thing about this mission is that you don't have to extract after you finish all of the terminals, because if you keep running back and forth through the different rooms, it will keep spawning enemies, so you can farm more and more stuff. But even if you don't want to do that and you just want to do the terminals and extract, you're still gonna get like 400 Rubedo, you're gonna get like 200 Oxium and 6 to 7 Fieldron samples, which is amazing for the amount of time you spend in there. And that's pretty much it for the standard resources. All that's left now is Tellurium, which you can either farm on Ophelia if you hate the Archwing, because it is a submersible mission, so it does drop Tellurium. But if you don't mind the Archwing, I would recommend you head over to Neptune and do Salacia, which is a Corpus mobile defense. But don't expect to get a ton of Tellurium from each run, because Tellurium is kind of like Orokin cells in space, so you really have to pray to RNGesus every night before you go to bed to get like 1 or 2 from each mission. But it's not that big of a deal because you don't need a ton of Tellurium for anything, really. And finally, we have Cryotic, which you can farm in literally every excavation mission. Just plop down an excavator, give it some power, and once it's done, you're gonna get 100 Cryotic from it. And that's it for the 2017 updated version of the Ultimate Resource Farming Guide. I hope the video was helpful, I hope you have enjoyed it. I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.